Oh, the woman didn't speak. Aren't we used to the woman saying you will
I
be
heard her.
You are now being recorded. So you're now being recorded. Welcome everyone to the August 8th reading for the Alta Mesa Center for the Arts featuring Maw Shein and Kenneth Wong. Today we're gathered not only to hear some fantastic poetry, but to support poets and political prisoners in Myanmar. You have received a program. I'll put another copy of it in the side here in the chat, where there's a link to support, should you so choose, Myanmar Mutual Aid, which is going to directly impact the effort there. And I'll let Kenneth speak more directly about what's going on. My name is Mary Vollmer. I'm the co-founder of the Alta Mesa Center for the Arts, which is housed and sponsored by Orinda Community Church. I'm going to my notes here if you're wondering. We believe that art is a spiritual act and a human right. We wish to provide a place where people from diverse traditions, artistic practices, and economic realities come together in community. We know that art can bridge the divisions, substantive and arbitrary, that divide us. We come together not only to practice and teach the arts, but to celebrate and learn from our differences and to foster lively and respectful interdisciplinary dialogues. We seek unity and diversity. So whoever you are and wherever you are on your artistic and spiritual journeys, you are welcome here. Again, we're thrilled to have Maw Shein and Kenneth Wong. They've asked me to keep the bios quite short. So Maw Shein is a poet of Burmese heritage, and her most recent book, Storage Unit for the Spirit House, has been out with a wonderful press called Omnidon Press. I will put links to all of these things in the chat. Kenneth Wong is a Burmese American author, blogger, and language instructor. And A Prayer for Burma I will put in the chat for you to take a look at. But rather than take up any more airspace, I'm going to step aside and let these two wonderful writers and poets take us through our hour. If you don't mind muting yourself, that would be great. I will hunt you out and mute you if your dogs are barking in the background. But beyond that, welcome. And I'm honored and humbled that you've all come.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks so much. Grateful to Mary and Elizabeth and the Alta Mesa Center for the Arts for hosting us today for today's event. I've been looking forward to doing this, and it's been such a pleasure to work with Kenneth. And thank you all for joining us today. This afternoon, I'm going to talk a little bit about today. We're going to share poetry, as well as translations and various resources to learn more about the ongoing resistance movement against the military dictatorship in Myanmar. We hope you will consider making a donation to Mutual Aid Myanmar, a collection of activists, academics, and policymakers working to support the democracy movement there. And today, August 8th, is the 33rd anniversary of the country's 1998 nationwide pro-democracy uprising, 8/8/88. And now I'd like to introduce my dear friend, Kenneth Wong. Kenneth is not only an author, translator, and marvelous teacher, he is also a fantastic artist. You have to see some of his art. I am a big fan of Kenneth Wong. Kenneth, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maw. So glad that we are able to do this together. And today, of course, is a very special day. It takes on additional significance because indeed, if you look at today's date, there are 2 8 that occur. So like Maw had just set out, in the 8/8/88, August 8, 1988, there was a huge student-led uprising against the military regime. I was a university student at the time, and we took to the street and we protested and we gamble with our lives when we face rifle-bearing government soldiers standing guard and preventing the marching route, because we realized that if we didn't do anything, the military regime that has started in Burma, also known as Myanmar, since 1962 will keep going on for who knows how long. So we did that, and the transition began happening in 2011. And we thought that was the end of the darkness that was been hovering over Burma. And we thought the clouds have been lifted and the country would slowly move towards democracy. But unfortunately, February 1st, when I turned on my Facebook feed, I realized that I was looking at a military coup in progress because there were live feeds going on of many of my poet friends and political activist friends streaming how the government trucks are going around. 6:30 here, California time, is around 4:30 dawn cracking in the morning in Burma. At the early dawn hours of February 1st, the military started rounding up activists, civilian leaders who were elected by the latest election, and threw them all into prison, detention. Many of them are still in detention. So since February until now, there were almost daily protests that are going on, and the Burmese military's response to it is just like a repeat of what happened in my own time in 1988. They simply use live ammunition to shoot against peaceful, unarmed protesters who lost their lives. The casualty numbers keep mounting up, and so is the number of people who are getting arrested. I'm very glad to be highlighting this situation more than anything through poetry, because poetry and revolution in the history of Myanmar or Burma goes hand in hand, as you will realize when we read the poems. It's because most of the poets have a history of standing up against authoritarian regimes and speaking what's on their mind. And for that, the authoritarian regimes tend to target the poets who they know could inspire the population to rise up against them. So in this current coup, it's not different from previous military regime. Many of the poets that both Maw and I know personally have been targeted. Some have gone to prison, and so we will do something to pay tribute to them. We unfortunately cannot openly name them because naming them would expose them to further danger, so we would not do that. The first thing I thought I'll do is actually to read a poem that was written long ago by a poet named Maw Shein, who had passed away. This is one of the reasons we can name him, because being dead, he is beyond the reach of the arrest or torture or anything that the junta might do to him. Maw Shein wrote this poem. In English, I translate it as "to wilt is to bloom." Maw Shein wrote this poem as a tribute to the 1988 student uprising. And you'll notice that in Burma, poets tend to write in symbolism. They rely heavily on symbolism so that if they are arrested, they can always say, I'm just talking about flowers. I'm not talking about revolutions. What? No, I don't know what you're talking about. So when you hear the poet talking about flowers, you understand that they are talking about something else. So the plan is I'm going to read it in Burmese original, and then after that, it'll be followed by Maw reading it in English. So this is the Burmese version, the original version, Maw Shein's poem called "To Wilt is to Bloom." Chui rago ga puin jin be. Ban soda chui rago ga puin jin be. De buin chui yuan, de buin wei luan ni ma be. Na buin chui yin, na buin wei luan ni ma be. Ke chui zamba on. Le yu le not thon him a song le thin dong la mong dang la be the art san chui zamba on ba a pude me ma chui on ma chui zama mamu babu chui da go ga bun jin me ba a bidama da ba be li chui lo chui lo ne ne chui da go ga bun jin be hey. Now, Maw, if you will do the honor of reading the English version, please.
Yes. To wilt is to bloom. For flowers to wilt is to bloom. If you pluck one, one more rises. If you drop two, two more spring up. Come, knock us down, wild gust, tumble us. Cut us down, storming blades. Blow your hardest, do your worst. Litter the ground with our buds. Trample on us, see if we care. To wilt is to bloom. That's the flower's doctrine. You may crush us, we may fall, but when we die, we rise again. A revolution poem by Maw Shein. And now I'd like to share some poems from Storage Unit for the Spirit House. And I just want to say a little bit about this book. It began as a group of poems I had been working on around the idea of containment. And I had been writing poems sparked by a curiosity about storage units, and continued to explore the theme of containment by writing about different forms of architecture, such as prison cells, towers, malls, etc. And at the same time, I began to think about past visits to Burma, as well as other countries in Southeast Asia, and remembered my interest in spirit houses and Nat worship, which is spelled N-A-T. The Nats are godlike spirits venerated in Burma and neighboring countries in conjunction with Buddhism. From there, I wrote the spirit house poems that ended up serving as a structure for my book. And the title of my first poem is Spirit House 4. Sibling follows sibling into thorn forest. Girl holds stick of incense, tip aglow. 37 gnats await atop Mount Popa. Volcanic relics, sister brother, blue-throated barbets. Lightning clue, nest lands on soft earth, entwined vines. Distant blaze, candlewick floating in bowl of oil. Storage Unit 202. 1. Secondhand gloves. 2. A king drinking pear juice trapped in a glass jar. 3. Wet hair and wet fur. 4. Velvet spurs. 5. Directions to the other world. Halls. Children not sleeping. Cement floors, mylar sheets. Small bodies turn. Held sorrows, collected panopticon. Held in cells, how do they hold? The halls get cold. The children are not sleeping. Containers. What about the spitting cobra? Why do I repeat myself? Does self-storage matter? Are your teeth still here? Is this a panic attack? When do the cormorants arrive? Where does guilt come from? Do you see the calathea? What disturbs me? I witness each body through the missing bricks. And this is the first poem in my book, Spirit House 1. The gnats have stolen my hair. Mosquito net winds itself around limbs. Watch clumps of black hair blow across the room onto balcony. The house on Inya Lake presses down on my neck and back. Smell of jackfruit and sweet orange consoles me. Eat semolina cake under crackling palms. Hear the cousins gossip. She is so idle, not as enterprising as her four sisters. Sometimes I cannot bear to watch these sunsets. And the title of this poem is Factory. Blindfold wound around a bleeding head. Sepia time cards and combination locks. Sound of coworkers arguing in the bathroom, or the other way around. Crows captured in dim light. A murder mystery for a limited audience. Pupils of soft brazen green. Lacquerware box in an abandoned mall. Factory workers assembling cell phones and wheelchairs. A scorpion in the break room. Diorama. Where will the deer sleep? I thought about this last night, as I always do. Why do we hope? Hope and beauty are obsolete constructs, they concurred. How does a painting speak? Language is the difference among three things. Who enters the spectacle? The brave ones with their silk skirts. The dining room table was set for 6. One missing spoon. My neighbor captures escaped bees with a butterfly net. Forest burns a violent red. Deer leap from the flames, singed flanks. Hold on now to what's left. Hospital. Tinctures for pain, capsized vessels. Hand reaches into warm body. She believes in magic, and so do I. Painted things. Riotous hips and rib cage, a being filled with liquid. Stop. Stop now. Please continue. Over is it? Sleeping twins lost in desert, found in hospital. Pointed things. Trinkets and scepters and waterfalls in Brazil. Dragon fruit scooped into bowls. Owls and blue spaces in parking lots. A slithering towards planted things. And this is my final poem, which is also the last poem in my book. Spirit House 6. The gnats had moved into the house on Inya Lake. Zoomed through halls with pocket knives, tamarind seeds, green bananas. Family offerings of jade bracelets, cheroot cigars, deer tails. The medium danced wildly in the living room, drunk on palm wine, spinning, spinning. Orchestra of circle drums and copper bells played on the staircase, natpwe. 8 children on the floorboards, leaping over uncles and cousins, shaking, shaking. Mother lit candles on the wall shrine. She spoke to the blue-winged insects. They whispered back. A gnat warmed itself by the flame. Auntie walked in a dream state, hot room. Cousin slowly opened a large trunk of teak and silver strips. The gnats flew inside, one after the other, after the other. Thank you, everyone. And now I'd like to invite Kenneth to read.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. Your poetry collection is, one of the reasons that I'm really glad that we're doing this is because when you hear the latest headlines about Burma, you get the impression that this is a country where nothing but bloodshed and crisis are happening. Indeed, the people are combating the COVID crisis with the oppressive military regime going on, and also because of civil disobedience movement and the economy being crippled, they're also dealing with extreme poverty. But the country is so much more than that. It's a country where George Orwell was inspired to write his first debut colonial novel, Burmese Days. Is a country where Rudyard Kipling was inspired to write his famous poem Mandalay. It's a country where the beauty of the river, the color of the sunset is a different tinge. And sometimes if you go to Mount Pokpa that is referred to in your poem, you could see Spirit Festival. This is the magical country that is beyond the headlines that I hope people today, when the conditions change, may get to experience in person. People are asking about how to help, and indeed Mutual Aid Myanmar is one of the websites, one of the organizations that we are highlighting. For people like me and for people like Maw with family relations in Burma, it is relatively easy to figure out ways to directly send funds to help people. But for people who don't have such connections, Mutual Aid Myanmar turns out to be one of the best way to do that, because they have set up easily accessible website donation link, and then they will figure out the logistics of how to get the funds to the nonprofit organizations and the people that need the help. Okay. The people that need helps obviously are politically persecuted people. One of the poems that I'm going to read is called Fearless Tiger. Fearless Tiger is by a former political prisoner named U Win Tin. U Win Tin died wearing his blue prison shirt. When he was released from prison, he said he will insist on, he insisted on wearing his blue prison shirt because he felt like he needed to show a sign of solidarity for the people who are still in prison. He said, so long as my comrades are in prison, I am myself not completely free, so I will continue to wear my blue prison shirt. So he was better known as the man in the blue prison shirt rather than U Win Tin. This is the poem that he wrote supposedly when he was still in prison, and because he wasn't allowed to keep pencils and books, he scratched out the text of this poem in plastic sheet with sharp objects, and eventually it was smuggled out by family members who meet them, and it got published. Fearless Tiger by Hantawadi U Win Tin. This is translation, of course, from Burmese. Burning sun, pelting snow, sometimes the heat is prickly, sometimes the cold shakes me. My narrow living quarter sees no bright light, feels no wind blow, sees no sunshine nor no moonrise, sees no human nor humanity. Sit or gaze, sleep or think. Can't get news, can't even sing a song, can't read, can't attempt poetry, can't preach, can't even speak to a soul. Samsara is empty, my world is tiny. I pace in my little space, I pause before the iron door. I stand for a bit, and the day is gone. Gone was the day before, gone is the whole day, gone will be the next day. Gone, 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 get them all gone. A day or a life, a month or an age, a year or an era. But I won't lose hope. I won't give up. Now I'm the anvil. Later I shall be the hammer. Don't you know truth is on my side and the people are on my side? Time stands with me and Buddha stands with me. Do you think that I'll grow blunt in monotony like a caged tiger at the zoo? What a laugh. Remember, as long as the black stripes cut across my yellow bright, unmistakable and clear, a tiger is a tiger and I am just the same. That's by Hantawadi U Win Tin, former political prisoner. Now, I also have a poet friend who I shall not name for his safety. Maw knows him too because he is a big fan of Maw's poetry, and he actually translates some of Maw's poems into Burmese and publicize it for Maw. Unfortunately, that poet recently spent quite a number of days in prison. We're lucky to see that he is released. He's also a big fan of T.S. Eliot's cat poetry. So whenever I like to pay tribute to him, I mention things that are related to cat. His one-time icon was a cat in the figure of Chairman Mao's communist suits. So this is a poem that I wrote as a tribute to him. And we're not naming him, but if he hears it, I bet he knows that this is a poem that is directed to him. It's called The Political Prisoner Cat. The Political Prisoner Cat. Instead of chasing yarn balls and birds, he chewed beetle quit, sipped tea under a tree, and read marks to unpaid worker mice. When he cried, meow, he meant Mao. His tail was sentenced to 20 years in insane jail for what his paws did in 88. He could easily slip through the iron bars and flee down the drain pipe, but he refused to leave his cell. You see, he couldn't bear to leave behind his little blue prison shirt. When the guards wanted a bedtime story, he told him about Aung San Suu Kyi. When they tossed him a fishbone in pity, he took a sniff and turned up his nose. He roared in Patrick Henry's Virginian accent, "Give me a wishbone or give me death." That's the poem for our mutual friend. So now I'll turn over to Maw for some more poetry. Maw?
Thank you, Kenneth. So I would like to introduce some work by poet and translator Coco Thet. He has done many translations and he currently lives in England. I'd like to say a little bit about him. Coco Thet won a Penn Translation Award for Bones Will Crow, 15 contemporary poets, co-edited with James Byrne. And if you have an interest in contemporary Burmese poetry, I highly recommend getting this book. And his 2015 collection, The Burden of Being Burmese, explores the untenable notion of being Burmese. I'd like to share some work from his full-length poetry collection, Bamboo Phobia, which will be coming out this fall on Zephyr Press, and I'll put a link in the chat afterwards. His first poem, Accent. My skin was born in the year of the pig. My accent much later, and it'd rather be a Capricorn. I seduce women with my accent. I subdue them with my skin. You will still hear my skin whinge even after maggots dwell and die in my accent. My skin is my landscape, my accent, my fresh air. My skin is too thin for bad weather. My accent incredibly thick. It will whistle underwater. I am not one of those who were sentenced to solitary confinement for life inside their own skins. I can get under your skin once I walk out of my accent. People judge me by my skin. My skin's purpose in life is to prove them wrong. Once I open my mouth, my accent will prove them right. I keep my mouth shut, my skin open. Which is truer, my skin or my accent? When it comes to swinishness, they are on the same page. In places where I am considered white, my yellow accent always holds me back. Since whatever out of my mouth is unpasteurized lie, I will always have a yellow accent. As for my skin, It will be blues when it fancies the blues. It will be jazz when it fancies jazz. The title of Coco's next poem is Celebrations. Celebrations. Over here, we celebrate absolutely everything, every single day. Every day is someone's birthday or funeral. Every other day is an anniversary of a massacre or a wedding. We celebrate every week when we delouse ourselves by rubbing our shaven heads with lime. Every 3 months when we deworm our stomachs with papaya seeds. We celebrate the spiritual power of our polluted air. We celebrate plastic in our rivers. We celebrate the lives of spiders by frying them for food. Sex, real or imagined, is a celebration of body's arousal. Orgasm is a celebration of body's contented closure. We celebrate celibacy. We celebrate and get humbled when rapists apologize. We feast with a lot of arak when a mother manages to rent her womb or sell her child. On the occasions of the funerals of poets who died from excessive drinking, we toast rice wine over their graves and get pissed drunk. When there's nothing to celebrate, we celebrate for nothing with nothing. All day long, every single day of the year, we smile and say to each other, "How are you today? Have you eaten?" and sleep well before bed. Comes the morning, we say, "Have you eaten?" to celebrate the day, for we are still here. And this is the last poem I'll read by Coco, A Very Special Day. It's monsoon. The sun is out. The sky is blue. But for the better weather, today is no different from any other monsoon day. Today is the first waning day of the moon. No bank holiday. There have been several misunderstandings surrounding today in history. What has been sacrificed? To what end? Crazy is not nearly insane. Spot on is off the mark. The right pan on the scales of justice careens with nothingness. They have disassembled grief and, in earnest, reassembled it. What was I doing that day? Today, I am no longer obliged to answer that question. Thanks for your work, Coco. And Kenneth?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maw. I believe, I think that we are going right on time, and I have one more poem, only one more poem to read. And then after that, we'll go to Q&A. So if you have questions about Burmese poetry, questions about Maw's poem, questions about Maw's poetry book, about nuts, which are the spiritual beings that are the focus of Maw's book, start thinking about your questions, and we'll do our best to field your questions. So this is a poem called Which Song, My Dear Girl? And it's my translation of a poem by student leader and dissident leader Min Ko Naing. Min Ko Naing spent a long time in prison for his involvement in the 1988 student-led uprising. This poem is marked as something that he wrote in Chinatown prison in 2011. The thing is, around 2011, there was a civilian government that would come in power in Burma and started releasing a lot of political prisoners, and Min Ko Naing would be among them. So when he was writing this poem, I wonder if he realized that in a few weeks or months or so, he'd be released and he'll be free, he'll be outside. But of course, the tragedy is this February, once again, a military regime took over. So people like Min Ko Naing are now back in hiding. He's not in prison, but he's in hiding, and he's one of the figures that are leading the resistance movement against the current military regime. So this is called Which Song, My Dear Girl, by Ming Kunang, written for his daughter when he was still in prison. Which song should I teach you, my dear girl? The sound of whips all day long for the sake of a pyramid. Let not this kind of music be around in your time. I don't want you to sing along, not even by accident. For you and this era to sing together, I blindly write in my dream a chorus that makes all the pianos mute. Can you hear the music of the rise and fall of rosary beats, of sunlight striking the pagoda gongs, of jasmine butts washing their hands, of snails pouting and stomping their feet? Just keep listening, my dear girl. A flock of skylarks over my head looks like they are heading home now, turning in for the night. Such a precious sight. Daddy is still looking at them, you know. That's a poem by Ming Kunang. So I think we are ready to start our Q&A. What do you think, Maw? Unless you have some other poems you'd like to share beforehand.
We are ready. If anyone has any questions.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Huh?
This is Gracia. For Kenneth Wong, I think that the script of Burmese is so gorgeous. So do you handwrite most of your poems? And also the political prisoners, if they don't have access to, I mean, I'm not sure how modern or unmodern, but handwritten poetry primarily going on, or curious.
Certainly before the invention of computer font, everything had to be written. But today, computer fonts allows you to type in Burmese. And that's one of the things that I would teach in my intermediate Burmese class, how to type. But in the case of U Win Tin, who wrote Fearless Tiger, of course, he wasn't allowed written instrument. That's one way the prison wardens would punish political prisoners. They would take away your writing instrument, if you're a poet in particular, because they know how painful it would be to deprive you of writing instruments. So U Win Tin, in his autobiography, recalled that he wrote this poem by scratching the words on a piece of plastic sheet with sharpened objects that he could find, possibly sharpened pieces of rock lying around on the floor.
Thank you.
Kenneth, I have a question for you. Could you tell everyone a little bit about the Burma Spring Film Festival that you and other filmmakers organized, and if it's possible, if people can still watch those films, because we watched many of them and they were so educational and so well done, and I think people would really like to know about.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. My documentary filmmaker friends, Jeannie Marie Halassi and Ellen Bruno, and I, and along with other people who care about Burma, recently co-hosted an online film festival called Burma Spring Benefit Film Festival. Of course, the festival is over, and so the right to stream them Netflix style that we negotiated is over. So it's no longer watch it that way. However, many of the documentary films that were featured in the festival are still available to stream through the individual filmmakers' website. Burma Storybook, for example, one of the films that captured your imagination, we talked a lot about that shows further the links between poetry and political activism and revolution in Burma. That is available for streaming for a modest fee through the filmmaker's website. So you can just look for Burma Storybook. Do a Google search and I'm sure you'll be able to find ways to stream it.
Thank you, Kenneth. Are there any more questions for us? Elizabeth?
Yes, this is Ron. And I was wondering, Kenneth mentioned George Orwell and the passing. And I came across this famous quote about a month ago, and I shared it in a context. Everyone said, "Oh, we know that," and that's in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And I had read it years ago, but I thought it was quite a revelation to come across it again. When you, both of you, have you any idea of the impact your poetry has on those who might have read that? I know that's a hard question. Or how many people who hear your poetry?
Well, I have kind of a funny story to share about Kenneth. So Kenneth and I have known each other many years. There's some kind of Kenneth and I have known each other many years, and when my first chapbook came out, or my second chapbook came out, Score and Bone, I didn't know this, but well, Kenneth, you probably remember the story better than I do, but Kenneth told me that I had a translator in Burma. And I said, I do? And he said, oh yeah, like they're translating your poems and, they're posting them all over the place. I'm like, really? And then all of a sudden in 3 days, I just got all these requests from people on Facebook. And so anyways, it was really interesting. I think that there's just such as we know, such a history of the importance of poetry in Burma, both in the past and present. And, Kenneth has a lot of connection with many of the poets there who are doing a lot of translation work. And, and Kenneth, you can probably know a little bit more about this, but publishing print journals as well.
In my time, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have the Facebook, so we Xeroxed handwritten poems, revolutionary poems or love poem, whatever that might be, and hand distributed them among our close circle. But in the era of social media, many of the Burmese poets use Facebook effectively. And that's one of the reasons the current junta, in their crackdown, they would actually try to censor the kind of writing that appears on Facebook. They disrupt the internet services because they know that things like poetry that can inspire a revolution has a way of spreading through social media like wildfire. So Christopher Merrill, who's actually among the audience, is one of the people who's responsible for translating and editing the book Bones Will Crow that Maw has just shared. And many of the poets who were featured in that anthology are currently continuing to share their works on Facebook. Sometimes they do it without signing their name because understandably in this current circumstances, if you say something critical of the military regime and you sign the name, that means you could get a call or a knock in the middle of the night and you'll be rounded up and taken to God knows where. But nevertheless, Burmese poets still continue to write poetry, pump them out. And events like this one, events like the one that the Asia Society organized a few months ago, where Christopher Merrill was actually one of the organizers and readers to it. Burmese poets tuned in too, because they knew that poets around the world are showing their solidarities with the Burmese poets who are being persecuted. So they care about these. And I have no doubt they hear about this event. They continue to watch for how the international poets respond or come to their aid.
What can either of you tell us about Aung San Suu Kyi?
Kenneth, would you like to respond to that question?
She was rounded up along with other civilian leaders on February 1st, and she was in detention. The military regime wouldn't disclose where she is held. There were a couple of times when she appeared on video because they are charging her under bogus makeup laws and using some kind of kangaroo court to discredit her. So she appeared on video and for the court proceedings, and she appeared to be healthy. But that's the only thing that we would know about her. But I don't think she has much contact with the outside world other than her her lawyers and her physicians. That may be it.
I wanted to add the document that Mary shared with us of all the resources that Kenneth put together. There are several, respectable news sources. I think it's in the beginning, right, Mary? The document with Kenneth's links, and Irrawaddy is one of the there it is, one of the resources. And so he did a great job of putting this together. So this is a way of getting more information and places to donate to as well.
I have a question. Actually, I have several, but I'm going to start by asking you, Kenneth, in the poems that you read, and also Ma, what you read, there's a lot of bleakness, but there's also an enormous amount of playfulness. Like, to wilt is to bloom, that is the flower's doctrine. Or in your poem, give me a wishbone or give me death, I thought was really kind of delightful. And I was especially taken with, now if I can find it, we celebrate spiritual power of our polluted air. And that sense of like the paradox and the contradiction, but also a certain kind of playful perseverance seemed really notable. And is that characteristic of Burmese poetry, do you think? Or are there characteristics that you see in contemporary Burmese poetry?
Well, I would say, reading Bones Will Crow, and there are a couple links on Poetry International that has different contemporary Burmese poets with their work. There is, it's interesting you notice that, Elizabeth, because I've noticed that as well, that seems to be this thread. I'd like to hear more of what Kenneth has to say about this, I think maybe that need for humor too, even if it's like a dark humor, to get through these, very difficult, challenging times, and using humor as a way of, I don't know, I don't want to say like balancing the bleak, but conveying the bleak. What would you say, Kenneth?
Well, playfulness is certainly a characteristic of Maw's poem. I know that from reading her poetry. Playfulness as part of Burmese poetry is something that, when Burma was under a military regime since 1962. The country was from 1962 to roughly 2011, it was under one form of military dictatorship or another. So when you live with this kind of environment, you have to find ways to appreciate the little small moments of joy and little things that bring you simple joy. Min Aung Hlaing, when he was a political prisoner and he was sitting in a bleak, dark prison cell with nothing other than his overhead view, which was probably open, he saw a flock of birds, and that became something that is the most precious sight for him in that bleak, dark moment. So I think you're absolutely right. When you're in darkness, you tend to see light. Light appears brighter than other people. It would be to other people because you're in a dark situation. Yeah.
As a kind of form of resilience.
Indeed. Yes.
What is?
Yeah.
I have a question, if it's okay to continue, for Ma, because I'm so interested in hearing you talk about the poems being about containment. But I really noticed that you do this kind of listing layering a lot. And there were a couple times halls appear, and it felt like the Spirit House. I'm trying this out as a kind of idea of spirituality is leaky. It transcends the containment and the boundary. And that I felt like you kind of rendered that by layering all these different elements together. And,
we are interested in the idea of spirituality. That's part of what's motivating this whole project. So I was wondering if you would comment on that. And
sure, it's a good question, Elizabeth. Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, I thought about the spirit house as a container, and that really helped me with, framing the book and, working on the manuscript. But then I started also thinking about the kind of the spirituality of objects, and then also the spirit, the life spirit in trees. So I have a series, Trees and Water, Bodies of Water, the sky. So in my book, I have 3 poems called Sky Space and 3 poems called Water Space. And I thought about sky and water as, in a way, it's kind of ironic because they seem open, but I also thought of them like as containers of spirit and life. And I wrote a poem that talked about a tree spirit. And I finally watched the documentary Intelligent Trees, which I highly recommend, very fascinating. And so I just been kind of going more down that route of thinking about like the spirit of trees and the connection between all of us, not just human beings, nature and humans. Welcome.
On the question about, or on the subject of the spirits, Maw, can you speak a little bit about the gnats?
Sure. The gnat stories are just fascinating. And basically, this belief system, it's kind of, I would say, and Kenneth, please help me out. It's, almost like a Buddhist folk religion where people have these beliefs in these gnat spirits, and there are the 37 great gnats, I think. And these stories are a little bit on the intense side, not all of them, but some of these stories are about people who have died in maybe violent ways. And there's these spirits could wreak havoc on one's life. Hence the spirit houses. So, in Burma and Thailand, I would see, my sister who's here, when we went to Burma, see the spirit houses on stilts. And in the little spirit houses, you will give offerings to appease the gnat spirits. So they won't, maybe cause problems in the house. But people also have spirit houses and, shrines inside their homes as well. And so there's like many religions, like these offerings that you give, whether it's flowers or rice or water, pieces of coconut, an egg. And I just found, I of course have so much more to learn about all the gnat stories, and I just find them so fascinating. Kenneth was so helpful when I was writing the book, not only with when asking him specific questions about Burmese culture, also with translating my title. And, surprisingly, there is no exact translation for storage unit in Burmese. And so Kenneth did a translation. And do you remember, Kenneth, what wasn't? Well, I'll have to go back and look at that.
Well, I remember that. I remember that. Yes, yeah. We well, there is certainly a word for storage unit, but there is no word for a storage unit where spirits are kept. That would be a word that when we were discussing, I told her, Maw, do you realize that we would be inventing a new Burmese word for the sake of your title? Because this is a non-existing object and we are giving it a Burmese phrase for it. So we came up with the Burmese version of it, but I understand what she is trying to do, because spirit houses embodies the spirit of this deity in the physical form. And her book embodies her thoughts and her sentiments about her ancestral spirits, and her longing and her memory, everything is captured sort of like the pages and the text, and the poetry themselves serve as some kind of storage unit. So we came up with a Burmese version of it, but I distinctly remember that linguistic debate that we had.
But it all worked out in the end.
It all worked out.
Kenneth. Looks like there's a question. So there's a question here from Noel. It's an interesting contradiction between storage units and gnats, who seem almost uncontained spirits. If the body is container of the spirit and soul, Maw or Kenneth, do you have any thoughts on that?
A lot of these spirits, I think they predate the Buddhist religion, because any kind of big trees, Burmese people will believe that that tree has a spirit in a personified human-like form. If there is a big mountain or a river, people believe that there is a certain spirit associated with it. So the little house is just a place that is convenient for the worshiper to go and put flowers or coconuts or whatever they want to put on as an offering. So obviously it's very similar to, the Japanese Shinto god. Each of them is associated with some kind of natural phenomenon. But Burmese also have this 37 spirits that are known by name, and they are the part of the official canon of Burmese deities. They are all supposed to live around this particular sacred mountain called Popa, near the center of the country. And there is a big spirit festival that usually takes place where all the 37 spirits in the form of little figurines will come out, and then people will worship with mediums and song and dance. And then after the festival, they'll be put back into a place. Well, I guess that is actually the spirit storage unit, if we were to call it that. So in that sense, there is some kind of storage unit, but we are really talking about the personifications of primitive ideas and primitive natural spirits.
I'd like to say something about storage units that's connected to Noel's question. I thought a lot about how, on the theme of containment, how we hold on to these objects for years and years and years. And why is that? And it really made me question myself when I had to move with my husband. And why did I hold on to these things for so long? And it just made me think a lot about attachment to objects, but also the stories and histories of objects. And then considering too, maybe perhaps an object could have a form of spirit or a sense of spirit, in the way that you might have a Buddha in your room, like a special stone that, might for you represent, a spiritual sense. So these are some of the thoughts that I had when I was writing the book.
Well, I'm sure there are many, many more questions. I know I have some as well, but we are out of time. We will stop the recording to stick around for a little while longer. I want to thank Maw and Kenneth very much for this hour. I'm inspired, and I've got all of these links I'm going to go track down. I have put an updated version of the program there so that you can find most of everything we've been speaking of. And if I've forgotten something, I am sorry. Coming up at Alta Mesa Center for the Arts, we have Elizabeth Rosner on September 12th. I'll put the link in the, I thought I did. I'll figure it out. And we'd love to see you again. Before we do that, please join me. However it is you applaud on Zoom, you can unmute yourself and clap. You can do a little emoji, just to thank these poets who are doing such phenomenal work and giving voice to poets who are sounding the cry for a whole population of people who cannot. And I'm grateful.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank
Yes.
you everyone for
Thank you so
coming.
much.
And I just
Wonderful.
want to thank Kenneth. We've been having meetings preparing for today, and it's just been so wonderful to just have this connection and be with you all today. Thank you.
Hope to see you in the future live event, okay?
Yeah.
Live events. Yeah, we do plan to do that too.
But we celebrate on Zoom anyway, right? Stay celebrating.
Oh,
Thanks, Kenneth. Thanks, Maw.
thank you. Thanks so much, everyone. Hi, David. Hi, Christopher.
Hi.
Thank you so much, David.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Hi, Gabrielle. Hi, everyone. Oh,
Wonderful.
thank you. That was
you so
really, I so enjoyed that. And thank you for being wonderful hosts. And all right. Bye, Ronald. Bye, Grusha.
Bye.